Trump just completed his first State of the Union address.
Yeah, he tried to strike a unifying tone early on and also focused on his central campaign theme of America First.
KCAL 9 political reporter Dave Bryan is live in our newsroom now with more on the president's speech. Dave.
Alina and Jeff, there were loud cheers throughout much of the president's address, but reflecting the deep divisions in our society today, there were also some audible boos at one point when President Trump was outlining the four planks of his immigration plan. All this on a night when unity was the theme, but it was only part of the story.
Tonight, I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity.
President Donald Trump opened his first State of the Union address with a plea for unity at a time of great division and hostility. But he also poured some gasoline on the fire, too, getting a roaring ovation when he referred to the controversy months ago about football players who did not stand for the national anthem.
Preston's reverence for those who have served our nation reminds us of why we salute our flag and why we proudly stand for the national anthem.
Mixing moments like that with calls for unity and bipartisanship, the president called on Democrats to join him in approving a plan to rebuild the country's aging infrastructure.
I'm calling on Congress to produce a bill that generates at least $1.5 trillion for the new infrastructure investment that our country so desperately needs.
But he prefaced his immigration plan with an extended monologue defining illegal immigrants as workers who are taking jobs away from Americans and gangsters who are killing Americans.
For decades, open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. They've allowed millions of low-wage workers to compete for jobs and wages against the poorest Americans. Most tragically, they have caused the loss of many innocent lives.
And President Trump put a bright spotlight on the mourning and suffering families whose children were murdered by an immigrant gang.
6 members of the savage MS-13 gang have been charged with Kayla and Nisa's murders.
As cameras zoomed in on the crying parents to make his point about illegal immigrants. And when the president focused in on his immigration plan, there were boos at one point when he said the practice of allowing immigrant family members to join them in moving to the U.S. should be ruled out.
A single immigrant can bring in virtually unlimited numbers of distant relatives. Under our plan, we focus on...
Massachusetts Congressman Joe Kennedy III argued that this administration is creating turmoil and anger across the country.
A government that struggles to keep itself open. Russia, knee-deep in our democracy. An all-out war on environmental protection. A Justice Department rolling back civil rights by the day. Hatred and supremacy, proudly marching in our streets.
Now, more than a dozen Democratic lawmakers, including several members of the Congressional Black Caucus, boycotted the speech to protest President Trump's words and actions. One of them, Congresswoman Maxine Waters from South L.A., said she was boycotting the speech, even though her office sent out a press release this afternoon about a local veteran from Gardena who it said would be her guest at the State of the Union address. Jeff, Lena, back to you.
Dave Bryan tonight in the newsroom. Thanks, Dave. And right now we're joined by our political panel.
Yeah, Anj Marie Hancock is a professor of political science and gender studies at USC. Mike Madrid is a veteran Republican strategist and a partner at the consulting firm Grassroots Lab.
Zev Yaroslavsky was a longtime Los Angeles City Councilman and county supervisor. He now teaches at the UCLA School of Public Affairs. We welcome all of you here to KCAL 9.
All right, we're first going to start with immigration. Mr. Trump wants a path to citizenship for dreamers, money for the wall, no lottery visas, and also an end to what he calls chain migration. In fact, that remark led to one of the biggest reactions of the night. So let's listen to this and then we'll all discuss it.
The fourth and final pillar protects the nuclear family by ending chain migration. Under the current broken system, a single immigrant can bring in virtually unlimited numbers of distant relatives. Under our plan, We focus on the immediate family by limiting sponsorships to spouses and minor children.
Zev, your reaction?
Well, my reaction is, my mother came here through a system of chain migration. My maternal grandparents had a relative here who sponsored them to come into the United States in 1923. But for that ability, that opportunity, I wouldn't be here. I think it's just such a phony issue. He talks about trying to bring people in the United States together, people in our country together, and then he does this sort of thing. And this is the problem. Both Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer have said we don't know where the president stands on any given day at any given moment. And that's, to me, that's the message tonight. It was a wonderful speech, well written, for him, well delivered. But what does he do tomorrow morning?
But I believe the chain migration would allow for immediate family members to come in, would it not?
Not clear to me.
I think that's what it was.
The concept is really called family unification. That's the actual language in the law. Chain migration has become this kind of politicized term that I think the president is using to kind of stop the practice. It's something that I find personally troubling as a member of the party of family values.
Sure.
Is reuniting and keeping families intact, I think, essential to who we are as a country. Having said that, with all of these moving pieces, that may be one of the pieces that does have to get reformed to get a bill out.
Well, after he made that comment, there was a lot of fact-checking going on, and the concern came when he said that anyone can bring just about any extended family member in. And in fact, when you go to fact-checking, on November 1st, there were 4 million people in line for these family-based visas. And in January, so in January of this year, Mexican siblings of U.S. children who applied in 1997 were finally getting calls. They're waiting 20 years. That's the extended family. That's not the parent or the sibling. So do you think those groans were because the facts that the president put out there actually aren't facts? It's not an open season where you can just bring anyone in.
It wasn't clear to me who did the groaning. I thought it was the Republicans who were groaning about the concept of chain migration. It might have been the Democrats. Hard to tell. But there's a method to the madness of people sponsoring people to come in here. My grandparents came here because my grandfather's brother had come here 15 years earlier and had laid the groundwork, so that when my grandfather and grandmother came to New York in 1923, they had somebody to take care of them and to walk them through our system. This runs against the grain of how our country was built and who built it. We are a nation of immigrants. It's a cliche, but it's true. And immigrant, it's the courageous ones. It's the energetic ones who make the move to the United States. The immigrants who come here. The ones who lack courage and daring do stay where they were born. So we are the beneficiary of this engine that has built this country.
But can you say when he said that he would be open to allowing citizenship for 1.8 million, he did mention that would be more than what previous presidents have desired to do? Is that something that you can see that would resonate, Anj, when you talk about, you see people there inside the chamber that groan? How does what he said resonate with the person sitting in their living room watching it on TV?
Well, I think that lack of clarity was absolutely apparent to the average viewer. I think what was interesting, though, I was checking out Twitter specifically about this chain migration comment, right? And really the proper scholarly word is family unification or reunification. And honestly, immediately, there was a meme that talked about how President Trump himself had benefited from this policy of family unification, going back generations to when the last name was Trump, and also talking about, unfortunately, bringing his spouse, Melania, into the conversation as well. So I think there is this kind of reaction among people sitting at home watching this who are saying, well, hey, wait a second, are you actually trying to cut off something that has benefited you personally? And I think that will be something that Trump will have to answer for.
Okay, well, the president stated that life is getting better for African Americans and Latinos since he took office just about a year ago. So let's listen in and then discuss this claim.
And something I'm very proud of, African American unemployment stands at the lowest rate ever recorded. And Hispanic American unemployment has also reached the lowest levels in history.
And the Black Caucus, they're not responding to that. Mike, your take on that?
Well, the reason why I think this is particularly important is because the economy, when it's doing well, has a strong tendency in a political environment to cover over a lot of other problems, especially really highly charged political concerns. The question is, and I don't think there's any reason, there's any other understanding of why Donald Trump is bringing this up, other than to try to take some sort of credit for an economy that was improving before he got there. And that's just one of the benefits of being a sitting president. You're going to take credit, even if it's not entirely well-deserved, and you're going to kind of accept it and own it. The fact that he brought up specifically African Americans and Latinos, I think, is particularly poignant because he made some claims on the campaign, especially to people of color, that his presidency was kind of a last best shot for people who didn't have a voice. And I think that I don't think you're going to see a lot of African Americans and Latinos responding terribly well to this president, but I thought it was a really insightful political point that he made.
I think there was also a little bit of a challenge there, too, for President Trump. And part of the reason why he has to include these kinds of things is some of the controversy that he's been generating over the past 6 to 8 months. His position on kind of Colin Kaepernick and folks standing up for the anthem certainly had racial kinds of dynamics behind it, as well as, of course, related to what we were talking about with regard to immigration, the comment he made about curse word countries, and the way in which that was also deeply racialized.
Well, even Charlottesville.
Meant he had to recover. If he's going to put out this unity, which is what presidents are supposed to do, he also had to recover from the damage he had caused earlier.
Now, Mr. Trump portrays himself as a tough on crime president, but tonight he called for prison reform. Listen to this.
As America regains its strength, opportunity must be extended to all citizens. That is why this year we will embark on reforming our prisons to help former inmates who have served their time get a second chance at life.
Asmarie?
Now, the reason I thought this was a really important and interesting thing for him to add to the speech is because it really appeals to libertarians and independents. And I think those are key constituencies that he is going to want to help deliver for Republicans facing tough races in 2018. Particularly in Florida, where there's a tight Senate race going between Rick Scott and Bill Nelson, but also here in California, where you start to think about people like Devin Nunes and others who are really going to be under threat. Being able to appeal and reach across the aisle for libertarians and independents to say, well, hey, you know, maybe Trump's okay on this issue, helps those members of Congress facing tough races.
All right.
Well, you know, it's really interesting. I wanted to bring up did you hear what the most tweeted moment was from the State of the Union? I'd like to have you guess if you can. So Twitter reporting that this was the most tweeted State of the Union ever at 4.5 million. And the top one was the national anthem, when he asked people to stand for the national anthem. So what's your reaction to that, knowing that that was the #1 viral moment, if you will, of this State of the Union?
I admit I thought they were going to pick the fact that he clapped for himself an awful lot. But I actually think that's one of the things that there is, among the viewers of this speech, some deep, deep unity on.
Okay.
Respect for the flag.
Just short of time, real quick, what's your reaction to that, about the national anthem?
Not surprised. I think
surprised.
most people
Am
would
I?
stand for the
I
national
think the president has an incredibly innate ability to pick issues that divide us as a nation and force people to take sides, oftentimes to his benefit.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.